Hello and welcome to this segment of Arts Talk. I'm Sherry Burr, your host, and my guest for this segment is Melody Groves, the author of the new book, Butterfield's Byway. Welcome, Melody.
Thank you, Sherry. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. So let's talk about this book and what it's about. The subtitle is The Longest Mail Route in the World.
Right. It's America's first transcontinental route across America, and it started in 1858. And up until that time, there was no way to get mail from the East Coast to the West Coast in less than 4 months. And what would happen is, say you were in New York, Pennsylvania, somewhere, you would put mail on a ship. It would sail down the Atlantic. It would hit the Isthmus of Panama. It would take about 2 weeks, unless it rained, to get across the isthmus, and they would put it on a boat, a ship, and then sail it up the West Coast. If it made it at all, it would take 4 months at best.
Wow. Wow. So what did this Butterfield's Byway, what did it do? How did it change mail delivery?
What it did was it sped it from 4 months to 28 days.
Wow.
And usually about 25 days. And what had happened was, because of the gold discovery in California in 1849, and of course California became a state in 1850, they still couldn't get mail very easily, within less than 4 months, like you said, if at all. And the people on both coasts were saying, hey, we need to get our mail. So the post office set out bids for this mail route. And John Butterfield is the one who was given the bid for lots of different reasons. The fact that he was good friends with incoming President John Buchanan might have had something to do with that choice, just a little bit. But so what he did was he was given $600,000 to create a road that would link St. Louis, Missouri with San Francisco. But the deal was he had to have the mail delivered within 28 days. And he did.
Wow. Okay, and you brought to show us the route. So
I did.
Let's put that up so that the audience can see the route.
Right, this is the southern portion of the United States, when you realize that the United States at that time was the West Coast and the East Coast. There was, the in-between was the Great American Desert, and nobody could understand why in the world anybody would want to go through there, much less live there. But what happened was the mail started either in San Francisco or St. Louis, and well, actually they started the same day. And they would go this way and this way, and there was what they call a bifurcated route that went over to Memphis, Tennessee, because the Postmaster General had been the former governor of Tennessee, and he wanted mail to get to Tennessee. So there was a lot of political machinations going on there, but that was the route. That's 2,800 miles that was done in 28 days, which is mind-boggling.
Yes. And it's interesting that the route goes south, because you would think that there would be a shorter distance to go San Francisco to St. Louis if you went through the Midwest.
Right. The problem with that is the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. You can't really go over the mountains in the wintertime easily. This was what they called an all-season route. It was much quicker, much easier. The problem was, even in 1858 when this started, there was a lot of rumblings of secession between the North and the South, and a lot of people in New York said, oh, that's just a way to get more property for the Confederates, for the southern state. It's just going to be a southern route. And it wasn't, although it turned out that way it was. But yeah, it's easier. There were no days that they really could not travel.
That's great. Now, you brought a picture to show us of what a stagecoach looked like.
Right. This is what they call this is an ampersand New York shot, but the stagecoach itself is a Concord stage, and it was built in Concord, New Hampshire, and fits 9 people inside and as many people, as you can tell, as you can get on top and hanging off the side. I think we counted 17 on that, and the record that I've heard of on a stage is 23.
23 on one this size?
Right. Now this is the biggest, best stagecoach you could get. It was the Cadillac of the time. It was the Rolls Royce, and it was fairly heavy. But what you can't see in this picture, unfortunately, is all the Concorde stages that Butterfield used were painted either bright red or bright green, and the wheels were red, orange, yellow, or green. And so when you see in movies and TV shows, when you see a stage come up in a bright color, it really was that color. And it worked out well because Cochise recognized that that stage belonged to Butterfield, and he was okay with people going through his part of the country. And so he realized, he said, okay, there's a red stagecoach, that one's okay. But he attacked the other stages, but not Butterfield's.
I see. And you've written about what life was like to be in one of these for 28 days. Can you share that with the audience?
I'll be glad to. The stage was about 4 feet wide, 4.5 feet tall, and it held 9 people. And if you look right under the driver, those 3 people were facing backwards. The people in the middle row were facing frontwards, and their knees would be dovetailed so that everybody would fit together. And then the people behind them had their knees in the backs of the people in front of them. So it was very close, very, very, very crowded. And on top of that, what you would do a lot of times if there were a lot of people, you would have to put your luggage underneath your feet and or the mail if there was a lot of mail. So you had stuff all around you, plus your own supplies. It was really interesting. And people slept because these rolled 24/7.
Okay. So they had to sleep
sitting
there. Up.
And that was one of the things that was unusual about this particular venture, is that before then, every stage line, say from Albuquerque to El Paso or Santa Fe to El Paso, what you would do is you would bring a team of horses behind you. You would bring camping supplies. So you go from, say, Santa Fe to Albuquerque. You'd camp overnight. You'd stop when it got dark. You'd camp overnight. You'd get your fresh team. You'd go maybe to Socorro. You stop again, camp for the night, and go on. And so it would take a week to get to El Paso. Butterfield didn't have that kind of time, so he started doing this, what they call way stations and home stations. And you would have the animals, the fresh team there at that time.
Okay. Let's ask the audience if there are any questions for Mrs. Groves.
I was just wondering what the research process was for writing this book, to really understand what it was like to live in one of these and just to understand really the nature of the times.
The research was really interesting because what I've done is I pretty much live in the 1860s in my head. And sometimes I look around and go, oh wait, this isn't 1860 after all. I've ridden stagecoaches, not 200 or 300 miles, but I've ridden in stagecoaches. I grew up just right out of Mesilla, about a mile from Mesilla, which was the headquarters in New Mexico, in this part of the country, and so there's a lot of information there. I talked to people who had, well, not firsthand accounts, but they had a lot more information than I did, and I found books, which was hard, magazine articles, newspapers, and I just out and about with a lot of people who know something about these. As a matter of fact, there is, of all things, a Butterfield not support group, but like a Butterfield club back in New York, and they have Butterfield stagecoaches and they take them out on tours and things. So I got a hold of that guy, and we chatted, and he sent me some photos.
Wow.
Yeah, go figure, huh?
Yeah. Other questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Ben. I know you from New Mexico Gunfighters Association, so I'm aware that you really have a fascination with the time period, but I find it interesting that anybody would really be fixated on that time period, especially women, because it wasn't an easy time, I think, we've all seen. So how would you compare, or how would you say that time period stacks up for women as opposed to modern times?
Each time has its problems. I think in some ways it was a lot more difficult back then because you didn't have the modern conveniences, and yet they weren't used to having electricity and running water and things like that, so they did what they needed to do. As far as 1860, it was just an amazing period of time. 1860 to 1870, 80 was our country just became a different animal completely. And it was a time of exploration and adventure and just going out to see what was out there. And as far as women, a lot of them just went along because not all women were, delicate little flowers. There were a lot of women out there who drove stagecoaches, who fought Indians, who dug wells, who did whatever they needed to do. And especially during the Civil War, which happened right after Butterfield closed down because of the Civil War, one of the main reason. A lot of the women had to take over for the men. And so the women rose to become kind of what the men did, kind of like in World War II, from what I understand. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Other questions? Can you pass the mic to the back? Is that Eric?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you need Eric to stand up, David?
Go ahead and stand up, Eric. Okay.
Hi, Melody.
Hi.
I've got a question. So I'm seeing the pictures of the stagecoaches, and all I can think of is the Oregon Trail PC game that we had to play in like elementary school and middle school. The game was hard, and people would die all the time. You know, that's the game over after that. I want to know how dangerous this was and the type of people that would want to incur that danger in doing this type of job.
It's a good question. Kind of people who, well, this was a mail route. So the idea was to ship mail. And then shortly after that, the post office discovered that they weren't making any money at all, so they included passengers. For Butterfield itself, it was fairly safe because he had good drivers. He hired only the very best drivers. And he knew these guys because he had a freighting company when he was younger. So he hired the best freighters, the best drivers, and then he had good relationships with the Apaches. And like I said, they would not attack his. As a matter of fact, he had the best safety record of any company at that time.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. The time went like that.
like that.
It's over, and I want to thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us for this segment of Arts Talk. And thank you, the audience, for joining us for this segment of Arts Talk with Melody Groves. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.